This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining this Webic Cricket 2020. The main focus for this webinar will be uh, to discuss about the critical care points, especially for the exam going students, critical care students, and also it will be a like a crash course for the uh, young intensivist, anesthesiologist, physician, even as well as emergency physicians, including critical care nursing staff. So we have come up with the Webi Critical 2020, which includes the system-wise discussion. First, we are taking neurology. In that, first topic will be traumatic brain injury is there. After this, we have discussion on the stroke, both ischemic strokes, even intracranial hemorrhage, subarachnoid hemorrhage, as well as we are discussing about the surgical options for this traumatic brain injury as well as strokes, that is decompressive craniectomy, when to do and when to call neurosurgeon, those aspects. If time permits, we also involve neurointerventional radiologist to discuss about those parts, that specific part also. After that, after it will take another 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, we will have a discussion on cardiovascular system. There we have a cardiologist and cardiac anesthesiologists are going to discuss about the preload responsiveness as well as myocardial infarction and cardiogenic shock, as well as other shock states, how to manage. After that, we'll discuss about the respiratory system. Then we'll discuss gastrointestinal, including pancreatitis. Those discussions will be done. So we want to cover all these aspects in 3 months, so that for the exam going students, they will go through all these aspects. In this, they can interact easily with the speaker. The expert is here, will be the speaker here, so they can interact. Even the others audience also will be the intensivist, so they can also interact in between, so that it will be a healthy discussion for the exam going for all students and also young doctor practitioners. So I will request Dr. Akshay HM to discuss on traumatic brain injury. Akshay is an intensivist, consultant intensivist and assistant professor, Department of Anesthesiology, JSS Medical College. Welcome, Akshay. And also,
Thank
once again, welcome all the audience. I will request Akshay to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Raghunath sir and ISCCM Mysore for giving me this opportunity for conducting this webinar on traumatic brain injury. So today we'll be talking about neurocritical care of traumatic brain injury. So neurocritical care includes all the departments, as you can see: radiology, emergency medicine, surgery, neurosurgery, nursing, pre-hospital providers, neurology, anesthesiology, and rehabilitation. Managing a traumatic brain injury is not an individual part, it is a teamwork. So coming to the introduction, so incidence global is 200 per 1 lakh population per year, and in India it's 150. And males are affected 2 to 3 times than females, and incidence is most common in 15 to 40 years. So most productive age of the people, they are the ones who are affected with the traumatic brain injury. So 1% of all deaths attributed to head injury in all over the world. So it is a major cause for morbidity and mortality all over the world. So 85% of severely head injured patients remain disabled after 1 year, and only 15% return to work at 5 years. So coming next to the definition, what is traumatic brain injury? So traumatic brain injury is defined as an alteration in the brain function or the other pathology following an external cause. So this is called as traumatic brain injury. So next, coming to normal cerebral physiological values in the so this is cerebral blood flow. Global is around 45 to 55 ml per 100 grams, and CMRO is 3 to 3.5, and ICP is at supine is around 8 to 12 mm Hg. So these are the common values which is required during next part of the discussion. So coming to factors which influence the cerebral blood flow. One is cerebral metabolic rate, temperature, PaCO2, PaO2, cardiac output, anesthetics, vasodilators, vasopressors. These are the factors which influence the cerebral blood flow. So myogenic or autoregulation, that is mean arterial pressure and bed viscosity, and even neurogenic extracranial sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways are also involved in factors influencing the cerebral blood flow. So next, coming to factors which affect the cerebral blood flow, that is mean arterial pressure. So cerebral blood flow, as you can see here, it remains plateau. Between mean arterial pressure of 60 to 160, it remains constant. So whenever that is the auto-regulatory plateau, dynamic, and it is dynamic and it differs among the different individuals. So below the limit, if 30% decrease in mean arterial pressure, there will be 50% reduction in the cerebral blood flow. So it is important for us to maintain the blood pressure in the all traumatic brain injury. So during next part of the discussion, it will be important. So cerebral blood flow and mean arterial pressure is very important. As you can see, there is plateau between 160 and 160. So it is cerebral blood flow is maintained. So less than anything less than 60 and above 160, there will be loss of auto-regulation of cerebral blood flow. So next, coming to hypotension, hypercapnia, and hypocapnia, and its effect on the cerebral blood flow. Cerebral blood flow is linearly associated between PCO2 of 20 and between 20 and 80 mm of mercury. So a change in PCO2 of above 1 mmHg correlates to change in cerebral blood flow of 1 to 2 ml per 100 grams. So hypotension, as here you can see, hypotension causes less than 33% reduction, and hypercapnia and hypocapnia also causes changes in the cerebral blood flow. Hypercapnia causes 2.5% change, and hypocapnia causes 1.67% change in the cerebral blood flow. So next, coming to the PaO2. PaO2 has minimal effect unless there is marked hypoxia. So if it is less than 60 mmHg, if PaO2 is less than 60 mmHg, then only cerebral blood flow will be affected. And PaO2 of more than 350 produces slight reflex cerebral vasoconstriction. So that also affects the cerebral blood flow. And also you can see here mean arterial blood pressure, see between 60 and 160 it is maintained, and even PaCO2 between 35 to 45 is maintained, above which there will be change in the cerebral blood flow. So coming to different types of the traumatic brain injury, one is primary and secondary. So primary is due to initial biomechanical insult to the brain. It may be cortical contusion, skull fracture, white matter shearing injury, whereas delayed sequelae of primary trauma, edema, hypoxia, intracranial hypotension, vasospasm, these are the secondary brain injury. So subclassifications. So according to the location of the lesion, according to clinical severity and mechanism of injury, we can again classify traumatic brain injury into different types. So that is intraaxial and extraaxial, and depending on the clinical severity, mild, minor, mild, moderate, and severe traumatic brain injury. According to mechanism of injury, penetrating and blunt or closed. So these are the different subclassification of traumatic brain injury. So next, coming to biomechanical and neuropathological events. So this is a direct tissue damage and impaired regulation to the cerebral blood flow and metabolism, and ischemia-like pattern causes accumulation of lactic acid due to anaerobic glycolysis. And this is the pathophysiology of traumatic brain injury. And increased membrane permeability causes edema, and ATP stores depleted, and excessive release of excitatory neurotransmitters. So, and calcium, activation of voltage dependent calcium channels, and activation of caspases, translocases, and membrane degradation, and apoptosis. So that causes the neuronal cell death. So now coming to management of the any traumatic brain injury. So pre-hospital care is very important in traumatic brain injury. So the pre-hospital care includes C-spine precautions, that is immobilization of cervical spine, and basic and advanced airway management to maintain oxygen saturation of more than 90% and EtCO2 of around 35 to 45. And hyperventilation may be used only in temporary measures if signs of herniations are present. And so outside hospital, if facilities are available, you can intubate if the persons are trained, or else you just maintain with bag and mask ventilation. And if IV access is possible, obtain IV access, and systolic blood pressure should be maintained with greater than 90 millimeter of mercury. The study shows that if for the blood pressure, systolic blood pressure less than 90 mm mercury for 2 episode or single episode causes poor prognosis of traumatic brain injury. And diagnose hypoglycemia and treat and assess GCS and pupil size, monitor pulse oximetry and blood pressure. This is the pre-hospital care which is required in any case of traumatic brain injury. So next, management by emergency department. So emergency care is ensuring cerebral perfusion, prevention of secondary brain injury, and prevention and management of brain herniation. So these are the three important points in cases of traumatic brain injury in cases in emergency department. One is ensuring cerebral perfusion. Second is to prevent prevention of secondary brain injury, and prevention and management of brain herniation. So, and recognizing and treating other secondary injuries caused due to road traffic accidents. Almost 33 to 40% of the patients with traumatic brain injury will have other associated injuries such as oral injuries or facial injuries, abdominal injury, or any long bone fractures, pelvis fractures. All those things are involved. Around 30 to 40% of traumatic brain injury will have associated trauma. So coming to herniation features and management. So if a patient is traumatic brain injury at the receiving end, means at the ambulance level or at the case of pre-hospital, if patient has having dilated non-reactive pupils, asymmetric pupils, so you can think there is herniation features. So and you can go ahead with herniation feature management, that is giving mannitol and maintaining blood pressure, hyperventilation, and mean arterial pressure of around more than 65 to 80 mmHg. So this is pre-hospital management if facilities are available, which is not found in most of our Indian setup. It is found only mostly in Western countries. So coming to next is neurological evaluation. Most neurological emergencies that require acute care are caused by head and spinal cord trauma. The main aim of the acute care of the patients is either is prevention of secondary neurological injury. So most commonly used for neurological evaluation in traumatic brain injury and the most validated is Glasgow Coma Scale, GCS. So it evaluates the presence of eye-opening verbal response and best motor response with a scale from 3 to 15, as you all people are aware of this. So, and advantages of GCS is good inter-observer reliability, helps to guide diagnosis and therapy, has prognostic significance. Mortality and morbidity are closely related to the initial GCS score, irrespective of the cause of head injury. So the other score which is used is FORCE score, that is eye response, motor response, brainstem reflexes, and respiration. But in GCS, we don't see the brainstem reflexes. That is one of the disadvantage of Glasgow Coma Scale. Whereas in FORCE score, we use eye response, motor response, brainstem, and respiratory system. So, but the most validated is GCS. So most commonly practiced word-wise is Glasgow Coma. So neurological evaluation, it is same Glasgow Coma Scale. So now coming to classification of brain injury. So mild is loss of consciousness less than 30 minutes, GCS 13 to 15, and post-traumatic amnesia less than 24 hours is mild, and moderate is GCS 9 to 12, and for post-traumatic amnesia from 24 hours to 7 days, and severe is GCS 8 or less. So next is pupillary assessment in patients with brain injury. The pupil is considered dilated if pupillary diameter is greater than 4 mm and fixed in the absence of constrictor or response to bright light. Bilateral pupillary light reflex should be assessed and used as a prognostic factor. The duration of pupillary dilation and fixation should be documented, and any asymmetry of pupil should be documented. So, and orbital trauma should also be excluded before commenting if the patient is having dilated pupils or unilateral dilatation. So next, the other investigations which we routinely use, such as ABG, CBC, RFT, LFT, everything have to be sent from emergency department itself, because if the CT finding are suggestive of any neurosurgical intervention, they should be taken up immediately for the surgery. So all investigations on arrival should be sent. Even basic ECG, echocardiography can be done initially on arrival to the emergency department. So radiological evaluation is best for detecting hemorrhages, fractures, and it is fast, very fast, and it is readily available. So indications for CT in cases of head injury are GCS less than 8 or decrease of GCS more than 3 since admission, loss of consciousness for more than 5 minutes, and seizures, penetrating skull injury, any signs of skull fracture, or any evidence of trauma above the clavicle. So these are the different CT scoring systems for traumatic brain injury. One is Marshall CT and Rotorell CT scoring. In Marshall, that is diffuse injury 1, there is no visible intracranial pathology, diffuse injury 2, diffuse injury 3 and 4. So as you can see, depending on the systems are present with midline shift and midline shift of 0 to 5 and midline shift more than 5 mm and evacuated mass lesion. So this helps in giving prognostication of the patient. So next is this different CT findings. So intraparenchymal hematoma. So the arterial, it may be arterial or venous. Typically it is rounded, and intraventricular hemorrhage can also be seen, and even subarachnoid between the arachnoid and pia mater, rupture of aneurysms, or it may be seen even in cases of trauma. You can in trauma, you can see between the dura and the arachnoid, you can see SDH, and you can at the last you can see the EDH. So these are the different images in cases of CT finding. So next, MRI brain, higher sensitivity than CT. It is only ideal to detect diffuse axonal injury, brainstem, and deep gray matter injury if CT doesn't pick up anything. But if the GCS is low or patient's is not matching with the CT finding, so then you can go with MRI brain. So it has higher sensitivity, and to detect, it can detect a diffuse axonal injury, brainstem, and deep gray matter injury. So now coming to the effects of brain injury to other organ systems. So respiratory system, upper airway obstruction, increased pulmonary shunting, neurogenic pulmonary edema. Cardiovascular system, it may cause sympathetic nervous system overactivity, hemorrhagic shock, Cushing's response, and hypotension. Musculoskeletal system, cervical spine injury is seen in 10% of the cases, and in GI system, there may be associated with intra-abdominal injury. Other systems such as DIC, hypokalemia, hyperglycemia, diabetes insipidus, hyponatremia, these are the different effects of head injury. So coming to the actual of critical care, neurocritical care. So these are the basic physiological goals of neurocritical care. That includes maintain saturation, oxygenation, maintain saturation of above 90%, PaO2 of about 100 mmHg, PCO2 of 35 to 45, systolic blood pressure of more than 90 mm of mercury, and pH between 7.35 to 45, and brain tissue oxygen pressure of 15 mmHg, cerebral perfusion pressure, that is 60 mmHg, temperature of 36 to 38, glucose levels 80 to 180, and electrolyte balance and coagulation profile and platelet should be more than 75,000 in case of any head injury, as it may less than 75,000 may cause increased risk of bleeding, and hemoglobin levels of 8 gram per deciliter. So this is the basis of whatever we do in our ICU. So any ICU setup. So these are the main thing which should be looked in case, along with regular your fast hug BD. These are the important main points which we take care in cases of traumatic brain injury patients. So goals in acute care of TBI's principal aim is to prevent secondary neurological injury. Secondary injury is determinant for outcome of severe head injury. So factors which contribute to secondary neurological injury after traumatic brain injury include hypoxia, hypercapnia, hypotension, intracranial hypertension, transtentorial or cerebellar herniation, pyrexia or core temperature of more than 38 degrees centigrade, and seizures. So these are the main factors which causes secondary brain damage. So if you avoid these things, the patient's outcome will be better. So hypoxia, hypercapnia, hypotension, intracranial hypertension. So these are things we should emphasize in any case of traumatic brain injury. So next, coming to hypoxia. How to prevent hypoxia is by supplementing oxygen. So supplementing oxygen, and hypercapnia to maintain EtCO2 between 35 to 45. Hypotension, you can give rush of fluids. Usually I indicated is normal saline. And transtentorial cerebral herniation, as mentioned earlier, and pyrexia by providing adding paracetamol or reducing by cooling externally, and seizures by prophylaxis. Only prophylaxis is indicated for only for short term, that is up to 7 days. After 7 days, there is no role of anti-seizure prophylaxis, that is anti-epileptics. So coming to airway management in traumatic brain injury. So that is most important vital part, because to prevent hypoxia, GCS less than or equal to 8, we should go ahead with intubation. So quick assessment of the patient's airway and hemodynamics is vital before intubation, and you should not rush with the intubation, and you should also assess for difficult airway, because if patient is having multiple facial trauma, mandibular injury, maxillary injury, nosebleed, so you may expect a difficult intubation, and don't try nasal intubations in cases of traumatic brain injury. So trauma patient should be assumed to have cervical spine injury until and unless proved otherwise. So avoid nasal intubation in suspected skull base or spine sinus injuries. Adequate sedation and muscle relaxation are needed to facilitate glottic exposure and reduce coughing, and which in turn further increases ICP. So adequate sedation and muscle relaxation is very essential in cases before you intubate in cases of traumatic brain injury. So next, coming to where C-spine fracture has not been excluded, cervical alignment with manual inline stabilization is recommended for cervical culver should be used whenever needed. So when facial fractures or soft tissue edema, you can use intubating LMA or video laryngoscopes to prevent excessive extension of the neck. So this is how stand in front of the patient to one side and hold mandible occipital and maintain counter traction. So this is for manual inline stabilization. So abnormal airway, if you are having difficult airway, you go ahead with awake intubation, or you can go ahead with cricothyroidotomy or retrograde intubation. Normal airway, cervical spine not clear, same elevation as normal airway except head held in neutral position. So if normal spine, hemodynamically stable, reduce ICP, you can use propofol or thiopentone and prevent cough reflex, and always use rapid sequence intubation in cases of traumatic brain injury, because we don't know their nil per oral status. So always go ahead with rapid sequence intubation, that is don't give IPPV, just give induction agent or succinylcholine, or you can give rocuronium, and go ahead with the intubation. So drugs used based on patient's hemodynamic status and reduces ICP and accompanies endotracheal intubation. So the primary goal is to maintain adequate cerebral perfusion pressure by ensuring hemodynamic stability. So ketamine is avoided as it increases ICP. So drug used are, if to reduce ICP, you can use propofol, thiopentone, and to prevent cough reflex, you can use succinylcholine, rocuronium, and fentanyl and esmolol to reduce blood pressure. If patient is hypovolemic or if patient is associated with other injuries like liver trauma or splenic injury, then you can use etomidate and succinylcholine or rocuronium. And so use of succinylcholine is a controversial topic, but recent studies have shown that it does not increases ICP more, so it can be used. But some studies have shown that using of succinyl, retrospective studies have shown that succinylcholine use as associated with increased mortality. So whenever available, you can go ahead with rocuronium. So rocuronium 0.6 to 1.2 milligram per kg can be used in cases with hyperkalemia and cardiac arrest, or where patients hemodynamically unstable, or you don't know the or if available, rocuronium is available, we can go ahead with and use rocuronium. So major goals, that is prevention of acute hypoxemia, supplemental oxygen and maintain saturation, prompt intubation and mechanical ventilation, and PEEP should be less than maintained between 5 to 8 to maintain a saturation of more than 90% or PaO2 more than 60, because increase in PEEP also causes a rise in intracranial pressure. So next, coming to the next goal is to maintain the blood pressure. So systolic blood pressure should be maintained of around greater than 90 millimeter of mercury. Patient with large intracranial hemorrhage with blood pressures lower range or relative tachycardia should be considered hypovolemic unless proven otherwise. Vasopressors are used to restore blood pressure. IV fluids to restore intravascular volume to maintain euvolemia. So one thing is here, we have to maintain euvolemia, because hypervolemia and hypovolemia both can cause rise in intracranial pressure. So that's why we are in traumatic brain injury. We try to avoid excessive use of fluids or less use of fluids. So both hypovolemia and hypervolemia should be avoided. You should maintain euvolemia. So hypertension, increase in catecholamines, and stress-induced activation of sympathetic nervous system. So we should rule out other causes of hypertension before administering antihypertensive. Only used if blood pressure is more, mean arterial pressure is more than 160. So above that, only the change in the cerebral blood flow will be there. So fluid regulation. So TBI causes disruption in blood-brain barrier, causing all fluids to cross it. So water movement across blood-brain barrier is dependent primarily upon the difference in osmolarity between plasma and the brain. So inadequate resuscitation causes cerebral ischemia, cytotoxic edema, and rise in intracranial pressure. So overhydration causes increase in central venous pressures. Aim is to maintain euvolemia. So colloid versus crystalloid, it is 0.9% normal saline or plasmolite can be used. 0.9% normal saline remains the gold standard for fluid resuscitation after traumatic brain injury. So next is SAFE trial, that is saline versus albumin fluid evaluation in traumatic brain injury, where using of albumin causes mortality is higher when albumin is used. Hence, albumin should not be used in cases of traumatic brain injury in resuscitation of traumatic brain injury patients. So, and FFP is also not recommended due to higher incidence of intracerebral hematoma formation and increased 1 month mortality. So, and even use of colloids is also not favorable in cases of traumatic brain injury, as it may cause AKI, and also it may cause altered coagulation profile. So hypertonic saline can be have potential advantage over other because their ability to decrease ICP and stabilizing the blood pressure. Concentrations available are 1.6%, 3%, and 7.5%, but we commonly use this 3%. Mainly we use to decrease the ICP. Only it is used in cases where patients is having acute kidney injury or chronic renal failure with traumatic brain injury, or in patients who are hypotensive. Those patients we can use hypertonic saline to reduce the intracranial pressure to reduce the intracranial pressure. So hypertonic solution should not be used first line due to rapid sodium accumulation, which is a cause of concern in chronic hyponatremia patients. So maintenance of blood glucose levels, that is also one of the most important thing in head injury patients. So stress causes hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia enhances neurological damage. Hence, to maintain a blood sugar between 120 to 180 is ideal. So 120 to 180 is ideal to maintain blood glucose level. Tight glucose control is also not favorable because it may cause recurrent hypoglycemia and patient may have bad neurological outcome. So temperature control is also because it is one of the important determinant of the secondary neurological injury. So temperature of 38 degrees centigrade associated with more than 38 degrees associated with higher morbidity, and 6 to 7% decrease in cerebral blood flow causes decrease in core temperature. So for every 1 degree decrease in core temperature, 6 to 7% decrease in cerebral blood flow is seen. So hypothermia decreases cerebral metabolic oxygen requirement, and even hemostatic need of oxygen also reduced. But according to different studies, so traumatic brain injury hypothermia is not indicated as we use in post CPR patients. So in head injury patients, don't try to give hypothermia. So next, coming to reduction of intracranial pressure. This is the most important part in improving the mortality and morbidity of the patients. One is head positioning. It should be supine and it should not be turned left or right. Hyperventilation only in cases of emergency, and hyperosmolar therapy, diuretics, sedatives, and decompressive. Final is the decompressive craniectomy, that is surgical treatment. So indications for ICP monitoring is abnormal CT or a normal CT scan if systolic blood pressure is 90 mmHg and age more than 40 years, uni or bilateral motor posturing. So these are the indications for ICP monitoring, but regularly ICP monitoring is not used in our center, and most of the Indian centers don't use ICP except in like Nimans or other exclusive neuro centers. Intracranial pressure monitoring is used. So head positioning, slightly head up position with 30-degree head up with tilt in the neck in neutral position reduces ICP and improves cerebral venous drainage. Lateral turning of head, tracheostomy tube ties, and Trendelenburg position can cause increase in ICP as they restrict the venous drainage. And respiratory muscle should be paralyzed to prevent coughing and bucking on the endotracheal tube, which also causes rise in intracranial pressure. So hyperventilation is indicated only in cases of brainstem herniation features are present, and it should not be used for longer period. So hyperosmolar therapy, which everyone knows that mannitol decreases brain motor content, and ICP primarily by increasing plasma osmolality, and it is less effective with larger lesions because damaged blood-brain barriers. Mannitol moves down its concentration gradient into brain. This may rebound, increase in ICP. So there is transient hypotension after rapid administration, and mannitol then increases blood volume, cardiac index. So increase in ICP is transiently seen. After 30 minutes, blood volume returns to normal and pulmonary capillary blood pressure and cardiac index drops. So mannitol is used in the dose of 0.25 to 2 grams per kg. Up to 1 gram per kg can be used, and reduces hematocrit and increases serum osmolality. And it may also cause hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, and decrease in pH caused by bicarbonate dilution. So next, diuretics, some people use, but in routinely our center we don't use diuretics to reduce the intracranial pressure. The low dose furosemide added to mannitol are effective in reducing brain bulk. So next, sedatives and analgesics. Barbiturates reduce cerebral metabolism, cerebral blood flow, and the limitations in using barbiturates are cardiac depression and reduction in arterial blood pressure and cerebral perfusion pressure. So barbiturate coma can be used as a last measure if the rise of intracranial pressure is not reduced by other measures. That is, loading dose is 10 mg per kg over 30 minutes, followed by 5 mg per kg followed by maintenance dose of 1 mg per kg per hour. So next is surgical treatment, that is decompressive craniectomy or ventriculostomy with drainage of CSF2 used for acute hydrocephalus. Surgery within 4 hours of the head injury resulted in 30% decrease in mortality as compared to 90% in cases where surgery was done after 4 hours. So emergency surgeries are also very important in reducing intracranial pressure. So there is one study, that is rescue ICP trial, where decompressive craniectomy has shown decrease in mortality and morbidity, but there is increase in patients with vegetative state. So it is one of the dilemmas to whether the patient, young patients 14 to 45 years, should be allowed to continue in vegetative states or reduce the mortality. So this is one of the complications which we regularly face in treating patients or advising the patients to undergo decompressive craniectomy. Sir, Raghunath sir.
Akshay,
Hello.
I can
Sir,
hear Akshay.
any questions or anything, any discussion you want to add or anything you want to add?
Okay. At this point of time, Akshay, you have elaborated very, comprehensively from the including pathophysiology, pre-hospital care, even we have come up to hospital care. Just if any questions listeners want to ask, you can chat there. They can message, okay? Or from behalf of them, they have sent some message questions also. I will discuss that part. Akshay, you have mentioned the autoregulatory plateau 60 to 160, right? That
Yes,
is
sir.
a case of head injury. Is it really matters? Because there is a brain injury is there, vascular endothelium is damaged. Is it really matters, or it is not? There is no autoregulatory response during TBI.
Some papers tell that there is not much regular response as in normal compared to normal persons. The traumatic brain injury need not follow the same rule, but it just in some papers they have given that it is important. So I think it is not very important because of there is disruption of blood-brain barrier. So it is difficult to tell whether that autoregulation is in place or not. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, that is one thing. Even though normal physiology looks 60 to 160, but we can't maintain that amount of extremities during that injury.
But one thing they have shown is any fall in blood pressure less than systolic, less than 90 mmHg pre-hospital or during the hospital, if it is fallen in 2 or 3 instances, then the mortality suddenly, there is rise in the mortality of the patient. Mortality or morbidity rises inconsistent with hypotension. That is one thing I want to add is just maintain normal blood pressure. So don't or prevent hypotension and maintain euvolemias. That is one thing they have mentioned in several papers, that hypotension is one of the most detrimental effect in causing mortality and morbidity.
Yeah, that is very true, Akshay. We have to prevent hypoxia, hypercarbia, and hyperthermia, or hypocarbia also. So maintaining these, preventing the secondary injury is the priority during head injury. That is the most important message we have to give from this class. Most of the time, when the patient, practical points, when the patient comes to the hospital ICU, even maybe accompanied by neurosurgeon or sometimes orthopedician, they want stressing on CT scan brain. That happens in several centers. Actually, they want CT scan, even the patient is restless, irritable. So there we are increasing ICP, they are increasing mortality there. So first priority is, if the patient is uncooperative, GCs is low enough, you have to intubate, ventilate, maintain normal BP, then we can consider CT scan brain. That is the message that has been clearly given by your slides. Okay, so first thing is A, B, C, D is the priority. So normotension, normoxia, normocarbia, normotension, normothermia. I think you can say several adds norms actually to this traumatic brain injury. Avoiding hyper or hypo, both is more dangerous in traumatic brain injury. So that is very clear message. In pre-hospital care, Akshay, you mentioned about the hyperventilation. Pre-hospital
Only
care.
in cases of like brainstem herniation are present, then you can use.
But nowadays, even hyperventilation within 20, actually it is nobody recommend now, nobody practicing
Okay.
hyperventilation. But first 24 hours, in fact, it is a contraindicated. This traumatic brain injury, what we got the guidelines before this guidelines, I think 2015 or I don't know the year. It has clearly
2016.
mentioned contraindicated. Contraindicated within 24 hours. Correct,
Okay.
no? Then can we clear in that actually we can avoid within 24 hours prophylactic hyperventilation?
But
Routine
in
we are not
according to
doing.
Brain Trauma Foundation 2016 guidelines, sir, they tell only if impending brain herniation signs are there, you can use that is given. Sir.
Yeah, that is after 24 hours. If the patient neurosurgeon we have called is ready for surgery, is coming up, transient time when you are intubated ventilator, still there is a herniation is there. Neurosurgeon is on the way to operate on the patient. Those patients, I think, can transiently we can try hyperventilation rather than the pre-hospital care. That's right. Hello.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Actually, you can give that message. We can avoid the hyperventilation completely as much as possible. Very rare instant when the patient you have done all the things, you are waiting for decompensated craniectomy, surgeon is on the way, then transiently that may be tried or may not tried. It depends on the clinician, but most of the time we can avoid because it causes more harm to the brain with this hyperventilation. That's that is one thing. So there are two questions are here actually. What is the target BP? Dr. Shobharani want to ask. Akshay, what is the target BP?
So that is maintain of mean arterial pressure of around same as we maintain in other patients, 65 to 70. That should be our target. Or maintaining systolic blood pressure more than 90. So mean arterial pressure of more than 70 is adequate, I think, sir.
Yeah.
70 to 75 mean arterial pressure.
Avoiding hypotension less than 90 systolic BP should be taken care as the priority. Normal tension is the maintain 120 80, 130 80, 65 60 65 MAP is okay, but avoiding hypotension is the priority. Okay, role of steroids in spinal cord injury. Murugaraj want to ask. We'll discuss that part during spinal injury in next upcoming classes actually.
But in traumatic brain injury, there is no indication for steroids.
Yeah, no role of steroids. Yeah, no role of steroids. Can we use? Yeah.
As we regularly in Mysore or Bangalore, we don't use ICP monitoring. So what is your take on that, sir? On ICP monitoring? So in our is one of the highest centers for neurosurgery like JSS. We have minimum 15 to 20 head injury patients at a time ventilated. So we don't have ICP monitoring. So does it really make difference or any difference?
Should be a pro con debate actually for the ICP monitoring actually. So if you're asking me, I know many intensivists also there in the group. See, any monitoring in critical care are not shown the mortality benefit. Any monitoring, you can take you can take invasive BP monitoring, whatever it may be, all the monitoring not show the mortality benefit, but it will be helpful to manage the patient easily. Where ICP is going up, I can remove CSF if there is already ICP draining system is there. If that is not possible, at least I can reduce ICP by using my drugs or ventilation. That can be done. But ICP monitoring as such is a debatable topic. If it is there, definitely I'll use it because it's helpful in the, even though there is no studies to show the mortality benefit, I'll definitely use it. But risk of infection is there. But we have to stimulate neurosurgeon to put more and more for the more and more ICP monitoring. I think can learn a lot with the ICP graph at least.
That itself is a separate topic.
What is your input on LUNDS concept? I think this is an important question for exam going students. It's quite coming LUNDS concept for say, targeted physiological volume based approach. So what is your take on?
You yourself elaborate, madam, the LUNDS concept.
So it is basically practiced in one of the European countries, if I remember, Sweden to be exact. So they have a concept wherein we are forgetting that brain is covered with dura. Okay, so and it's a collapsible structure. The moment your dura collapses more and more, if you avoid the dural collapse and maintain a good mean arterial pressure, the ICP will be much better. If I had a slide on this, I would have shown, but I think some other day. So the Lund's concept is different compared to your regular ICP or CPP based is because they transfuse more of albumin or colloid based solution and the PRB leukodepleted RBCs, and they avoid decompressive hemicraniectomy at all costs unless it is a herniating brain. It's an upcoming concept. It has shown lot of benefit. Unfortunately, it is done only in Sweden, and Sweden has, if I'm correct, I'm not exact, I do not exactly remember the country, if Sweden or Netherlands, if it is it is not been replicated elsewhere, and it has shown to be much beneficial compared to raised ICP or your CPP concept. So I would suggest students to just go through this because this is an important concept per se, the dural collapse, prevention of dural collapse and thereby preventing raised ICP.
Okay, thank you, Sumalata, for your valuable input. Lung concept, yes, if it looks like a lung concept, it looks like a lot of difference is there. So they have their own, advantage and disadvantage. We will discuss if time permits about this all again. Now, Akshay, we have coming to the radiologically CT scanning. We have a separate session on that neuromonitoring. Radiologist will discuss on the CT reading for the students. Coming to the intubation, you have told the scoline and ketamine. There is some people here, we are just questioning. Ketamine nowadays they found to be not increasing ICP, even though regular test mentions that.
Many studies have shown that it doesn't increase ICP, and even scoline also doesn't cause raised ICP to much a significant level. So we can use scoline and or rocuronium, but scoline in 2 or 3 retrospective studies, scoline has shown increase in mortality. So they have advised to go ahead with rocuronium. So it doesn't mean that we cannot use scoline. So we can use scoline if it's a difficult airway or way, or if not able to ventilate, or after induction agent. So scoline can be used, I think.
Okay, I think we can use the drugs. Most important is avoiding all those secondary injuries. Very important. Coming to the PEEP, you have mentioned 5 to 8 or up to 10.
No, it's depending on to maintain saturation of above 90% and oxygen PaO2 more than 60, sir. That is all the indication. If patient is having ARDS or lung contusions, then we can go ahead with higher PEEP. Only thing is it reduces the cerebral perfusion pressure and it causes rise in ICP. So that is what they are that they have mentioned in Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines 2016.
What is the highest PEEP you are mentioning, Akshay?
Any physiological PEEP is okay, sir, just to maintain saturation of 90%. That is their basic PEEP of 5 or 6 is sufficient. So depending on the patient, like if patient is having trauma, ARDS, or if patient is having lung contusions, then we may need higher PEEP to maintain the oxygenation, sir. So depending on the individual patient, we have to maintain the PEEP. Otherwise, if a patient is having normal lungs, even physiological PEEP of 5 is sufficient. So that is what Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines have mentioned.
Okay. What about this saline versus mannitol?
3% saline versus mannitol. It's if 3%, both are equally effective, sir. Only thing is if patient is having chronic kidney disease or acute kidney injury, if patient is having hypotension, then we can go ahead with 3% saline, because 3% saline does not cause hypotension. So at that point we can use 3% salines.
So there is no studies. We can say that yes, 3% improve the mortality and mannitol causes harm.
No, no. Even Brain Trauma Foundation 2016 guidelines also suggest initially to use mannitol or hypertonic saline if mannitol cannot be used.
Okay.
What is your opinions?
Yeah, there is again debatable topic actually mannitol versus 3% NaCl. Quite a lot of debate has been happening in several conferences. There is no much difference. Slightly 3% is slightly better, especially in the traumatic brain injury because of the reduction in cerebral edema. And the patient is hypotension pre-hospital care. There is a 3% is found to be better than the mannitol at the pre-hospital settings. But in hospital setting, there is no study has shown that this is better than that, and one is better than another one. Definitely we can try to use drugs when the definite need is there, rather than just for when is the impending herniation is there, we can use this mannitol. And mannitol doses what we are many people are using is wrong actually. They use only 100 ml mannitol. That is nothing will happen with that. It is only 20 gram. We have to 1 gram per kg, maximum 60 gram. So 3 bottles of mannitol may be required when the patient is impending herniation is there. Otherwise, not much helpful. And even boluses also, there is again controversy the boluses with continuous infusion of 3% NaCl. So a lot of debatable topic actually. We can discuss in the controversies about this. But students should know these. They will definitely ask about this pharmacotherapy in this traumatic brain injury. We'll proceed further, Akshay.
Okay.
If there is any further question. Okay.
So next, coming to intracranial pressure. So stages. Stage 1 is reducing ICP ventilation and analgesia and paralysis, IV fluids to maintain mean arterial pressure. And stage 2 is mannitol and hypertonic saline can be used. So, and next, even though if it is not used, then we can go for barbiturate therapy or decompressive craniectomy. So this is the Brain Trauma Foundation 2016 guidelines for maintenance of intracranial pressure. Insert ICP monitor. So all guidelines, Western guidelines say ICP monitoring, but in India it is not so easy to use intracranial pressure monitoring. So maintain cerebral perfusion pressure of 70 mmHg, that is mean arterial pressure minus ICP is cerebral perfusion pressure. So intracranial hypertension is there, yes, then consider repeat CT scan. So if in ventricular drainage, if available, then we can go ahead. So still hypertension is persist, then you can use mannitol, 0.25 to 1 gram per kg IV. So may repeat mannitol if serum osmolarity is less than 320 and patient is euvolemic. Then hyperventilate to PaCO2 of 30 to 35. So again, still rise in ICP is there, then you can go with high dose barbiturate therapy or decompressive craniectomy. So this is and also coming to nutrition. Nutrition is one of the important role in patients' mortality. So replacement of 140% of resting metabolic expenditure in non-paralyzed patient and 100% resting metabolic expenditure in paralyzed patient using enteral or parenteral formulas containing at least 15% of calories as protein by 7th day after injury. This is what Brain Trauma Foundation 2016 guidelines suggest. As we all know, regularly we use RT feeds or for shorter period, or if patient is prolonged coma or patient is having prolonged ICU stay or prolonged stay, then we can go for endoscopic gastrostomy. You can so the patient will tolerate that better. And one more thing I want to add is tracheostomy. Early tracheostomy is also important. It may not reduce the mortality or morbidity, only it may reduce the ICU stay. We can wean them off ventilator easily, as the patient will be only thing that comes here is GCS. So low GCS that we cannot extubate. So earlier tracheostomy, earlier we can mobilize and earlier we can move them out of ICU. So this is coming to seizure prophylaxis. Risk factors are GCS less than 10, contusions, SDH, intracerebral hematoma, seizures within 24 hours of injury. So early seizures is the only indication to give prophylaxis. So among early post-traumatic seizures, 1/3 is seen in first hour, 1/3 in 24 hours, 1/3 in 1 to 7 days. So Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines, these are the whole thing which I have summarized. This is summarized in one single table. So this is coming from blood pressure, oxygenation, ICP, blood pressure, oxygenation, so thresholds. So treat if SBP of 90 mmHg and oxygenation of PO2 less than 60 mmHg. And coming to treatments, hyperosmolar therapy, mannitol is effective, and before ICP monitoring, use only for signs of transtentorial herniation. And prophylactic hypothermia does not decreases mortality. And infection prophylaxis, antibiotics can be given, and early tracheostomy, as here they have mentioned, reduces ventilator days but does not reduce mortality or pneumonia. And do not routinely change ventricular catheters. These are some of the important Brain Trauma Foundation 2016 guidelines. It will be automatically updated. So use of corticosteroids in preventing secondary injuries not indicated. So this is the CRASH trial, corticosteroid randomization after significant head injury. Study the effects of early administration of methylprednisolone and outcome of head injury, and higher risk of death within 2 weeks of TBI and higher risk of severe disability with corticosteroids. So it was concluded that corticosteroids should not be used routinely in treatment of head injury. So same major goals in acute care of brain injury patients, same prevention of hypoxemia, maintenance of blood pressure, so reduction in intracranial pressure. So cerebral protection, in focal ischemia, there is region of salvable tissue surrounding the necrotic core. So restoring oxygen and substrate via collateral circulation is significant in saving the membrane. So different drugs have been tried, but none of them are effective in providing cerebral protection. So advanced monitoring. So cerebral perfusion, we can use transcranial Doppler ultrasonography, laser Doppler flowmetry. And ICP, we can use invasive, use ventriculostomy or external ventricular drain intraparenchymal devices. Non-invasive CT scan and optic nerve sheath diameter. So optic nerve sheath diameter we routinely use. So if it is more than 5 to 6 millimeter, then we can say there is raised ICP. So in Indian setup, I think we can go with the using of optic nerve sheath diameter, as there is not much damage if you use the ultrasound for lesser periods to the optic nerve, and it is repeatable, and we can do it again and again, and cost effective. So, and cerebral oxygenation, jugular bulb venous oximetry, it can be used, and so venous SvCO2 should be maintained between more than 50 and less than 70%. So if it is less than 50 or more than 70, the mortality increases. So these are the different advanced monitoring systems. So next, different pharmacological therapy are used, but none of them are found to be effective. So these are the different models used in predicting morbidity of the patient, or how well the patient will improve, or patient will be able to walk, or patient will be bedridden. That is, one is impact model and other is the crash model. So these two models are routinely used to prognosticate the patient, because on admission, all the patient relative want is will the patient be okay, will the patient walk, will the patient be able to do his activities once he is recovered. So they will be always trying to tell us that if you are giving assurance, so the patient will recover, or so they are willing to spend the money. So it should not happen like the patient spends all the money and patient is in the vegetative state for longer time. So we can use this impact model. It is available in MedCalci online. So whenever the patient comes, you just put the values and you can give the mortality, morbidity prediction for traumatic brain injury patients. So different studies using 10,000 and 8,500 have been done for 6 months mortality and 6 month unfavorable outcome. So it is one of the good scoring system, impact extended and impact core and crash. So these scoring systems we can use for mortality and morbidity. So March is Brain Injury Awareness Month. So take-home message is prevention of hypoxia and hypotension are the priority. Use normal saline for pneumonia, that is grade 1B indication. Target ICP is, before it was 20, now it is 22, that is grade 1B indication. And sedative medications to be individualized. Short-term antiepileptics for early seizures, that is grade 1A indication. Thromboprophylaxis for prevention of DVT, grade 1A indication. And don't use glucocorticoids for patients with severe TBI, that is also grade 1A indication. So, thank you.
Thank you, Akshay. It was a really wonderful talk. Now I request the intensivists who are around, they can discuss some more points they want to add, or if anybody want to ask question, they can come, you can put video on and ask question. Dr. Lakshmikant, you want to add anything? Dr. Sumalata? Okay, one question is here. DVT prophylaxis, when to consider? Akshay.
Usually after 24 hours we can start, sir, but mechanical DVT we can consider immediately when the patient is admitted. So only if you are planning to give heparin or low molecular heparin, if there is no intracranial pathology or bleed, then we can start immediately after 24 hours. That is what the guidelines suggest.
So early DVT prophylaxis.
Yes, because for 30 to 50% of head injury patients may have pulmonary thromboembolism risk or DVT risk.
So now earlier used to wait for DVT prophylaxis 10 days, then it has come 7 days, then it has reached 4 days. Now as early as possible, if there is no bleed, that means after 24 hours. That is the message, Akshay?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Vijay Chaloraj, thank you, sir, for being here actually. Sir, want to ask question, indication for cervical spine screening in head injury and prefer radiological investigation.
All head injury patients should be considered as there is a cervical spine injury, and any injury above clavicle usually we consider as a cervical spine injury is present, and preferred is CT scan. But if the patient is not affordable or anything, we can go ahead with the X-ray. If any neurological deficit is there, then we can directly go ahead with the CT cervical spine. Usually we get for all head injury patients, CT cervical spine is done in our JSS hospital, and along with CT brain together.
And when to consider removal of cervical collar in unconscious patient without radiological evidence of spine injury?
Only when there is no this one, sir, means there is no if radiologically there is no CT radiologically, or if CT doesn't show any cervical spine injury, then we can remove it. Usually after CT scan comes and reporting is done, so we are medico-legally safe that we can remove the cervical spine collar, because that is what we do in our JSS. Once for all patients we use cervical spine collar. So if only after report comes, then we will remove the cervical spine.
Dr. Vijay sir, we have a one session for this actually cervical spine injury and screening and removal of collar. Neurosurgeon is going to talk on this. I think Dr. Akshay has answered that question. And one more question, Dr. Vijay, I want to ask: prophylactic antibiotics in head injury. There is no role of prophylactic antibiotics in head injury, especially in India. We have a lot of multi-drug resistant infection is there. So try to avoid prophylactic antibiotics as much as possible. What is your take on this, Akshay?
Yes, sir. There is no role of prophylactic antibiotics. Only if patient develops any fever or patient is having open wounds, then we can add with the basic antibiotics. But in our setup, as all ventilated patients are put upon antibiotics because of the neurosurgeon's protocol in JSS.
Okay. But Dr. Basuraj, you want to ask what about enteral feeding? When to start?
As early as possible, sir. Even less than within 24 hours, we can start if there is no intra-abdominal pathology or just simple brain head injury patients. We can start immediately. There is no harm in if the patient is intubated. So if the patient is not intubated, then we have to wait at least for 24 hours. So if there is no fall in drop in GCS. Or if there is any further progression of the head injury. So that is what we follow. If a patient is intubated, as in our JSS ICU, all 8 beds in neurosurgery ICU will be intubated. So we start them as early as possible. The next day of, if the patient comes at night, the morning we start with the enteral nutrition. Only if we are not able to give enteral nutrition because of some spleen injury or intra-abdominal injury, so then we withhold the Ryle's tube feeding or enteral feeding.
Okay. So the very valid question is asked by Dr. Vijay and Dr. Basuraj. Feeding is the most important in this head injury as early as possible when the resuscitation is done. Intubation, ventilation is done. Patient is complete resuscitated. We can start immediately. So within 24 to 48 hours, I think we can have to start enteral nutrition in this patient if there is no contraindication. So there is a very valid question. Any intensivist to add some points to this discussion? Okay. Dr. Lakshmikant want to add some question or some this one? Okay.
I think probably this we missed out on the sugars, I guess.
Sugars.
Normoglycemia target like 80 to 180 is again the
Target I mentioned, sir. Glycemic control 120 to 180 is ideal, but tight control is not indicated because the chances of hypoglycemia
and 3% again there are some studies which says 3% scores slightly over or mannitol, especially people who are in shock or hypotension, borderline BP and electrolytemias. And if you go by the number of people using 3%, like abroad and all, they hardly use mannitol. And probably India and subcontinent, we are using more of mannitol comparatively. And probably I feel 3% as the initial choice of osmolar therapy is probably more safer compared to mannitol.
Yes, because we can avoid kidney injury and also associated with hypertension. And even in Narayana, Bangalore, we used to follow 3%. Sir. Only here we don't use because repeated sampling, repeated sodium monitoring is not possible. So that is why we are not preferring 3% in cases.
Okay, thank you, Lakshmikant, for adding a valuable point for this. Actually, yes, sugar should be maintained 140 to 180. That is the target in ICU in any other patient. And hypertonic saline scores better in a few studies. Actually, we are also using both mannitol and 3% NaCl. So, any other questions from the students? It is a very good opportunity to discuss with. What is that? Okay. Okay. If any intensivist want to add, they can add any further for the exam point of view for the students. It will be helpful. Dr. Sumalata, I think she is there or left. I don't know.
No, sir, I'm here. Wonderful discussion.
You want to add anything else, madam? Because a lot of topics has been discussed in a 1 hour. I think it is very difficult.
Information overload for the students, and they should not get discouraged. Exams are near, and so much is there to read.
Any point you disagree with the presenter actually?
Nothing, sir. Everything is well covered. Only thing is lunch concept. It's important. I would like the students to go back and read. That would be better.
Okay. Thank you, madam. Dr. Guru Prasad, sir. You can hear me. Dr. Guru Prasad.
Yeah, I can hear you, Raghu.
Any questions, sir? You are doing a very good job in the Gadag actually, in spite of non-availability of neurology, neurosurgeon, immediate availability. I'm talking. So you're managing all head injury patients. What is your any question from your side, sir?
Our role at present for head injuries, ABCD, intubate, stabilize, and shift the patient to sleep. So that's what we are doing since last 5 years.
Okay.
That's what. That's all we are doing at present. We don't have a neurosurgeon in Gadag.
Okay. Still, you are preventing all the secondary injuries and managing, sir. Great effort actually. We'll
That's what I'm happy to tell that. Happy to tell that even in the last 5 years, we have not lost a single patient in transit also, and they have reached the tertiary center very safe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Raghunath ji. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Basudhara sir
No,
want
no,
to
I
ask-
just want to
Raghunath,
congratulate you, Raghunath. And Akshay, you did a good job, wonderful. Everything was covered, and all the aspects, and all final
Thank
aspects,
you.
everything is covered. It's a big topic actually. In 1 hour,
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Hello.
Thank you so much,
Just
sir.
this.
Uh,
And I would like to congratulate Dr. Raghunath from Mahan side. They conveyed the message and for the this means good start. So this is really required in this COVID pandemic and lockdown. I think for the students and as well as I think even for the consultants also I think we need to spread this awareness. Many people would like to join and I think we have to personally call them, but nobody knows, and even the link I did not know aware of till you send me the link. So and also all are used for this Zoom. That's the thing. So this all are used for the Zoom software. And I think initially when I was finding difficult with this today, we need to get means adjusted and more means familiar with this app. Webinar app. That's what I'm using. And from Mahan side, I congratulate Raghunath and even Akshay and all the speakers, future speakers. Okay, Raji. Okay. I think from next class onwards, I think more people will be joining from Mahan.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
There was difficulty in sending the link actually. We will send the link properly, sir. There was some problem. So, okay. There was difficulty in sending the link. Sorry for that actually. We will send the link appropriately. Once again, I thank Dr. Akshay for the great effort. And yeah, and all the audience and also all the intensivists be here. Tomorrow we are talking on the neurologist Dr. Shushruth will be discussing acute ischemic stroke. It's a big topic actually, how to manage. He's a stroke specialist. He was almost around 10 years. He was in America managing only stroke patient. He's a resource person about stroke. So we have a resource person here. We'll utilize as much as possible. Tomorrow all students you can ask your friends also to join this. If they want one group to be formed, we'll form one group for the Webicare 2020 so that we can add all the students so that this message will be appropriately sent. Thank you all. Thank you one and all. Sir, somebody is talking.
I think we need to make one flyer every day regarding the speaker.
Yes.
Raghu. Every day we make one flyer. Tomorrow Shushruth is speaking, so we make one flyer from the topic and about the speaker. And from morning to evening, probably 2-3 times we post in the groups so that everybody will be aware of the thing.
Okay. Ravi
so that's the thing.
Yeah. Ravi sir, please.
Yeah,
please, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you?
Yes, sir. I can hear you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hypothermia is indicated in brain injury, right? Hypothermia. Yeah. What about hypothermia in the traumatic brain injury?
No, in traumatic.
Does it protect?
No, sir,
does it protect the brain?
Not indicated.
It
is not shown to improve the.
I think
Hello.
Dr. Akshay,
How
you
much
want to answer?
temperature?
Akshay, please answer.
Sir, it has shown not much role in improving the mortality benefit in case hypothermia. So only in case of post CPR it has shown very good results. But here in traumatic brain injury, hypothermia and hyperthermia both are not indicated. Only maintenance of normal temperature is indicated. So hypothermia is not beneficial in cases of traumatic brain injuries. As
In cardiopulmonary bypass, we use hypothermia to protect the brain. In CPB, we use hypothermia to protect the brain, but here it is not so effective.
yes, sir, because it is not efficacious. Even many studies have been done, and it has shown that it has not shown any good results or improving neurological outcome or mortality.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So we'll close this session. Again, I thank everyone. Okay, tomorrow we'll meet on 3 p.m. Okay, thank you. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.